Danny Rodriguez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he crawled out of the maintenance shaft in the engine bay. The quantum drives hummed around him, their blue glow casting strange shadows on the metal walls. At 22 years old and barely 5 feet 6 inches tall, Danny had to squeeze through spaces that his alien crewmates could never fit into. That was the only reason they kept him around, he thought bitterly. Rodriguez. The voice boomed across the engine bay. Danny turned to see Voxtal approaching, the crystalline being's body chiming with each step. The Vorthak engineer stood nearly 8 feet tall, his translucent form pulsing with inner light. "Did you fix the thermal regulator in Sector 7? "Yes, sir," Danny replied, holding up his toolkit. The connection was loose. Should run smooth now. Voxtal's crystal face shifted into what Danny had learned was their version of a sneer. "Amazing what happens when you send something small enough to actually reach the problem." The alien's voice carried that familiar tone of mock praise that Danny heard every day. From across the bay, Crix's laughter echoed off the walls. The Caltharian weapons officer was nearly 9 feet of scaled muscle and sharp teeth. "Careful, Voxtal. You might hurt the little human's feelings." Danny said nothing. He had learned long ago that fighting back only made things worse. Instead, he focused on cleaning his tools and logging his work in the maintenance reports. The crew of the Nexus Dawn treated him like a useful pet at best, a nuisance at worst. The ship was massive, easily the size of a small city. It belonged to the Caltharian Science Consortium, a research organization that studied the strange creatures and phenomena of deep space. Danny was the only human aboard, brought on because his engineering degree and small size made him useful for maintenance work in tight spaces. Captain Zethkar entered the engine bay, his red scales gleaming under the lights. The Caltharian commander was old even by their standards, with scars across his snout that spoke of battles fought long before Danny was born. Behind him floated Wisp, one of the 3 Zephyrian crew members. The gaseous being looked like a small cloud of silver mist, constantly shifting and sparkling. "Status report," Zethkar commanded. "All systems running at full capacity," Voxtal replied. "The human fixed the thermal issue in Sector 7. "Good." Zethkar barely glanced at Danny. "We have received a distress signal. A mining colony called New Titan has gone dark. We are changing course to investigate." Danny's heart jumped. He had heard stories about mining colonies that went dark. Sometimes it was equipment failure or pirates. Sometimes it was something much worse. "Sir," Danny ventured, "if I may ask, where is New Titan located?" The captain's yellow eyes fixed on him with obvious annoyance. "The edge of void territory, human." "Why do you ask questions that do not concern you?" Danny felt his mouth go dry. "Void territory was where the Shadowmaws lived." Every spacefarer in the galaxy knew about the Shadowmaws, massive creatures that could grow longer than most ships. They hunted in the darkness between stars, attacking anything that moved through their territory. Most people considered them to be the apex predators of space. "Just curious, sir," Danny managed. Crix laughed again, a sound like rocks grinding together. "The little human is scared. Maybe he should hide in his quarters while the real crew does the work." "That is enough," Zethkar said, though his tone suggested he found Crix's comment amusing rather than inappropriate. "Wisp, inform the navigation crew of our new heading. Voxtal, ensure all systems are ready for potential combat. Crix, prepare the weapon systems. What about Rodriguez?" Voxtal asked. The captain looked at Danny for a long moment. "The human will continue his maintenance duties. Make sure the engines stay operational. That is all he's good for." As the senior crew members left the engine bay, Danny felt the familiar sting of being dismissed. He returned to his work, but his mind wandered to what they might find at New Titan. Mining colonies were tough places, filled with people who worked dangerous jobs for good money. If something had happened to them. Hours passed as Danny worked through his maintenance checklist. The ship's artificial gravity systems needed calibration. The water recyclers required new filters, and 3 different backup power systems had minor faults. It was the kind of routine work that kept a ship running but earned no recognition from the crew. During his break, Danny made his way to the observation deck. It was one of the few places on the ship where he could be alone. The massive windows showed the stars streaming past as the ship traveled through hyperspace. Danny often came here to study the data files on the various creatures they encountered during their missions. He pulled up information about Shadowmaws on his personal tablet. The files were mostly warnings and tactical assessments. According to Galactic Defense Forces, Shadow Maws were purely predatory, operating on instinct alone. They attacked ships without warning, using their massive size and natural bioelectric fields to disable technology before moving in for the kill. But Danny had always been fascinated by animal behavior. Even back on Earth, he had spent more time watching wildlife documentaries than playing with other kids. Something about the official reports on Shadow Maws bothered him. The attack seemed too coordinated, too intelligent for creatures that were supposed to be mindless killers. Studying again, little human, Danny turned to find Naira behind him. The Helix female was one of the more tolerable crew members, though that was not saying much. Her tentacled form moved with fluid grace, and her large eyes held something that might have been sympathy. "Just reading about the creatures we might encounter," Danny replied. "The Shadow Maws," Naira said, reading over his shoulder. "Dangerous beings. Even the Caltharians fear them." "Do you think they are really just mindless predators?" Danny asked. Naira's tentacles curled in what he had learned was their equivalent of a shrug. "Does it matter? They kill, we avoid them. That is the way of things, but what if we are wrong about them? What if there is more to their behavior than we understand?" "Such questions are for scientists and philosophers," Naira said. "You are maintenance crew. Focus on keeping the engines running and leave the thinking to others." She left him alone with his thoughts and his data files. Danny knew she meant well, but her words stung. Everyone saw him as just a maintenance worker, too small and insignificant to contribute anything meaningful to their missions. The ship's intercom crackled to life. "All crew to stations. We are dropping out of hyperspace in 10 minutes. Prepare for standard reconnaissance protocols." Danny gathered his tools and headed back to the engine bay. Whatever they found at New Titan, he would be ready to keep the ship running. It might not be glamorous work, but someone had to do it. And despite how his crewmates treated him, Danny took pride in doing his job well. The engines hummed around him as the ship prepared to face whatever waited in the darkness of void territory. Danny checked the power readings one more time and settled in to wait. Soon, they would learn what had happened to the miners of New Titan. He just hoped they would all survive long enough to make it home. The Nexus Dawn shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace. Danny gripped the support rail in the engine bay as the ship's systems adjusted to normal space. Through the small viewport near his workstation, he could see the scattered rocks of an asteroid field stretching into the distance. "All stations report." Captain Zethkar's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. "Engines stable." Foxtall reported from his position at the main engineering console. "Weapons ready," came Crix's growling response. "Sensors detecting multiple contacts," added Wisp, the Zephyrian's electromagnetic voice crackling slightly through the speakers. Danny moved to his secondary console and pulled up the external camera feeds. New Titan mining colony sat in the center of the asteroid field, a collection of connected domes and mining platforms that should have been blazing with lights and activity. Instead, it was completely dark. "Sir," Wisp's voice came again, "I am detecting large organic signatures moving through the asteroid field, bioelectric patterns consistent with Shadow Maw juveniles." The bridge fell silent. Even through the communication system, Danny could feel the tension that gripped the crew. Shadow Maws were bad enough when they were adults. Juveniles were unpredictable and often traveled in groups. "How many?" Zethkar asked. "At least 6 confirmed contacts. Possibly more hiding among the larger asteroids." Danny watched the sensor displays on his screen. The organic signatures were massive, each one at least 50 meters long. They moved with purpose through the asteroid field, following patterns that seemed almost like patrol routes. "Captain," a new voice joined the conversation. It was Dr. Myra Singh, the human administrator of New Titan Colony, speaking through an emergency transmission. Her signal was weak and filled with static. "Thank goodness someone received our distress call. We have been trapped in the central habitat dome for 3 days. Dr. Singh, this is Captain Zethkar of the Nexus Dawn. What is your status? We have 43 people alive in the habitat dome, but our power is failing. The Shadow Maws appeared 4 days ago and have been circling the colony ever since. They destroyed our communications array and several of the mining platforms, but then they just stopped." Danny frowned as he listened to the transmission. That did not match the typical Shadow Maw behavior described in the files. According to the reports, Shadow Maws attacked quickly and decisively. They did not lay siege to targets. Stopped? Zethkar repeated. They are not attacking anymore. They just circle the colony, but they are not letting us leave. Our shuttles cannot get past them. Captain, we need immediate evacuation. Our life support will fail within hours. Danny studied the sensor readings more carefully. The Shadow Maw signatures were indeed moving in circular patterns around the colony, but something was wrong with their formation. One of the signatures was moving erratically, its bioelectric pattern flickering and weak. Captain, Danny said into his communicator, I am seeing something unusual on the sensors. The human is not authorized to speak on this channel, Crix growled. Let him talk, Zethkar said impatiently. What do you see, Rodriguez? One of the Shadow Maw signatures is moving differently than the others. Its bioelectric pattern is irregular. I think it might be injured or sick. How would you know that? Voxtal asked. Danny hesitated. He could not explain how he knew, but something about the readings reminded him of injured animals he had observed back on Earth. The pattern was wrong, like a creature in distress. I have experience with animal behavior, sir. The pattern suggests distress. Interesting, Wisp's voice chimed in. The human may be correct. I am detecting unusual electromagnetic fluctuations from that particular contact. Captain Zethkar was quiet for a moment. Dr. Singh, we need to get a team to your habitat dome to restore power and prepare for evacuation. The question is how to get past the Shadow Maws. Our shuttles are too large, Crix said. The creatures will detect them immediately. What about the maintenance pods? Danny suggested. They have minimal electromagnetic signatures. A single pod might be able to reach the colony undetected. And who would pilot such a mission? Zethkar asked. The pods are barely large enough for one person, and the pilot would need to be small enough to fit through the colony's emergency airlocks. Danny realized that everyone was thinking the same thing. He was the only crew member small enough to fit in the maintenance pods comfortably, and the only one who might be able to reach the colony without triggering the Shadow Maw's attention. I will do it, Danny said before anyone else could volunteer him. Absolutely not. Crix laughed. Send the human on a suicide mission? Even I am not that cruel. It is not a suicide mission, Danny insisted. The maintenance pods are designed for external repairs in hostile environments. I can reach the colony, restore their power, and return before the Shadow Maws even know I was there. And what if you are wrong? Naira asked. What if they detect you anyway? Danny looked at the sensor readings again. The injured Shadow Maw was still moving erratically, separated from the others by several kilometers. If he could time his approach correctly, he might be able to avoid the main group entirely. I will take the risk, Danny said. Those people will die if we do nothing. Their children will die. Captain Zethkar was silent for several minutes. Finally, he spoke. Very well. Rodriguez, prepare Maintenance Pod 7 for launch. You will have 1 hour to reach the colony and restore their power. If you are not back by then, we will assume you have been killed and will attempt a different approach. Understood. Sir. As Danny made his way to the pod bay, he could hear the other crew members discussing his chances over the communication system. Most of them seemed to think he would be dead within minutes of leaving the ship. A few seemed genuinely concerned for his safety, though they kept their voices low. Maintenance Pod 7 was a small, cramped vehicle designed for short-range repairs and inspections. It had basic life support, minimal shielding, and a small toolkit for emergency repairs. Danny ran through the pre-flight checklist quickly, his hands shaking slightly as he thought about what lay ahead. Rodriguez, Voxtal's voice came through the pod's communication system. I have uploaded the colony's technical specifications to your pod. The main power coupling is located in Section C of the Habitat Dome. You will need to replace the primary conduit and reset the backup generators. Thank you, sir. And Rodriguez, Zethkar added, if the Shadow Maws detect you, do not attempt to fight them. Return to the ship immediately. That is an order. Yes, sir. Danny sealed the pod and initiated the launch sequence. The bay doors opened to reveal the asteroid field beyond, with the dark colony waiting in the distance. Somewhere out there, massive predators circled like sharks around wounded prey. The pod launched smoothly, its small engines barely registering on the ship's sensors. Danny adjusted his course to take him through the densest part of the asteroid field, hoping the rocks would mask his approach. His heart pounded as he navigated between the floating boulders, each one large enough to crush his tiny pod. On his scanner, He could see the Shadow Maw signatures moving in their patrol patterns. The injured one was still separate from the others, drifting near a cluster of asteroids about 2 kilometers from the colony. As Danny watched, its bioelectric pattern flickered again, becoming even weaker. Something was definitely wrong with that creature. Every instinct Danny had developed from years of observing animals told him that the Shadow Maw was in serious distress. But according to everything he had been taught, Shadow Maws were ruthless killers that showed no weakness and gave no quarter. Danny pushed the thought aside and focused on his mission. 43 people were counting on him to restore their power and save their lives. He could worry about the injured Shadow Maw later, assuming he survived long enough to worry about anything at all. The colony grew larger in his viewport as he approached, its dark windows staring at him like empty eyes. Behind him, the Nexus Dawn waited among the asteroids, ready to flee if his mission went wrong. And somewhere in the darkness between the rocks, ancient predators continued their silent hunt. Danny guided the maintenance pod through the last stretch of asteroids toward New Titan colony. His hands were steady on the controls, but sweat dripped down his back inside his environmental suit. The colony's emergency airlock was just ahead, barely visible in the darkness. Pod 7, this is Nexus Dawn. Wisp's voice crackled through the communication system. We are monitoring your approach. Shadow Maw signatures are maintaining their patrol patterns. You appear to be undetected. Copy that, Danny whispered, not wanting to risk speaking too loudly, even though the Shadow Maws could not hear him through space. As he approached the airlock, Danny noticed something strange on his sensors. The injured Shadow Maw had moved closer to his position, drifting among a cluster of large asteroids only a few hundred meters away. Its bioelectric signature was barely registering now, flickering like a dying light bulb. Danny docked with the emergency airlock and quickly cycled through the connection protocols. Within minutes, he was inside the colony's habitat dome, breathing recycled air that smelled of fear and desperation. Emergency lighting cast long shadows down the corridors as he made his way toward Section C. Thank God you made it. Dr. Singh appeared around a corner, her face pale and exhausted. The power coupling is this way. We have been running on backup batteries for the last 6 hours. Danny followed her through the darkened corridors, past rooms full of frightened colonists. Children pressed their faces against doorways, their eyes wide with fear. Some of the adults looked at Danny with hope, others with skepticism. He could hear their whispered questions. That is the rescue team? Just one person, and he is so small. The power coupling was exactly where Voxtel had said it would be, a massive junction box that connected the colony's main generators to the distribution network. The primary conduit had been completely severed, probably by the electromagnetic pulse that Shadow Maws generated when they attacked. This will take about 20 minutes to repair, Danny told Dr. Singh as he opened his toolkit. We do not have 20 minutes, she replied. The backup batteries will fail in less than 10. After that, life support shuts down. Danny worked faster, his small fingers moving quickly through the complex wiring. Being small had its advantages in situations like this. He could reach connections that larger beings would struggle with. As he spliced new conduits into place, he could feel the weight of 43 lives depending on his work. Pod 7, this is Nexus Dawn. The communication system crackled. We are detecting movement in the Shadow Maw signatures. They may have noticed your presence. Danny's heart skipped a beat, but he forced himself to keep working. How long do I have? Unknown. The injured signature has moved significantly closer to your position. It appears to be investigating the area around the colony. Dr. Singh grabbed Danny's arm. We need to evacuate now before they attack. Not yet, Danny said, shaking her off gently. I am almost finished. Just a few more connections. He completed the repairs and activated the new power coupling. Lights flickered on throughout the habitat dome, and the hum of life support systems filled the air. The colonists cheered from the corridors outside, their voices carrying relief and joy. Power restored, Danny reported. Beginning return to Pod 7. But as he made his way back toward the airlock, his communication system erupted with urgent voices from the Nexus Dawn. Rodriguez, abort the mission immediately. Captain Zethkar's voice cut through the chatter. The injured Shadow Maw is moving directly toward your position. You have less than 2 minutes before it reaches the colony. Danny ran through the corridors, his heart pounding. Behind him, Dr. Singh and several colonists followed, hoping to evacuate with him. But as they reached the airlock, Danny realized there was a problem. The maintenance pod could only hold one person safely. Taking passengers would slow him down and make them all easier targets for the Shadow Maw. I have to go alone, Danny told them. I will come back for you once I reach the ship. No, Dr. Singh protested. You cannot leave us here. I will be back, Danny promised. The power is restored. You can hold out a little longer. He sealed himself into the pod and launched immediately, his small craft shooting away from the colony toward the asteroid field. On his sensors, he could see the Shadow Maw signature approaching rapidly. It was massive, easily 100 meters long, moving with the fluid grace of a creature born for the void of space. Pod 7. Alter course immediately, Wisp's voice urged. The creature is intercepting your current trajectory. Danny tried to change direction, but the Shadow Maw was too fast. Within seconds, it appeared in his viewport, a sleek serpentine form covered in bioluminescent patches that pulsed with inner light. Its massive head was pointed directly at his tiny pod, but something was wrong. As Danny got closer, he could see that the creature was badly injured. Long gashes ran along its sides, and several of its bioluminescent organs were dark or flickering weakly. More importantly, it was not attacking. Instead, it seemed to be trying to guide him somewhere. This is impossible, Danny breathed. It is not acting aggressively. Rodriguez, get out of there. Crix's voice roared through the communication system. It is playing with you before it strikes. But Danny's instincts told him otherwise. The Shadow Maw's movements reminded him of a dog he had once rescued back on Earth. Injured, frightened, but somehow trusting. Against all logic and training, Danny found himself following the creature deeper into the asteroid field. The Shadow Maw led him to a hollow space carved into one of the larger asteroids. As Danny's pod lights illuminated the interior, he gasped at what he saw. Nestled in the hollowed-out rock were dozens of large, pearl-like eggs. The injured Shadow Maw was not a random predator. It was a parent protecting its young. By the void, Wisp's voice came through the communication system. Are those Shadow Maw eggs? Rodriguez, return to the ship immediately, Captain Zethkar ordered. You are in extreme danger. But Danny could not bring himself to leave. The parent Shadow Maw floated near the entrance to the asteroid hollow, its massive body blocking the way to its eggs. It was dying, Danny realized. The injuries were too severe, and it was using the last of its strength to protect its children. On impulse, Danny opened his pod's emergency airlock. The action triggered every safety alarm on his console, but he ignored them. He pulled on his helmet and activated his suit's life support, then stepped out into the void of space. Rodriguez, what are you doing? Multiple voices shouted through his communication system. The Shadow Maw turned toward him, its massive eyes reflecting the light from his pod. Danny expected to be crushed or incinerated by bioelectric discharge. Instead, the creature simply watched him with what looked like curiosity. Moving slowly, Danny approached the injured parent. Up close, he could see that the wounds were not from a fight with another Shadow Maw. They looked like cuts from mining equipment, the same kind of automated drones that the colony used to harvest asteroids. You were trying to protect your eggs from the mining drones, Danny said softly, even though the creature could not hear him through space. That is why you attacked the colony. You were not hunting. You were defending your family. The Shadow Maw's bioluminescent patches flickered weakly. Danny could see that several of the wounds were infected, probably from metal fragments left by the mining drones. The creature was suffering. Without thinking about the consequences, Danny removed his helmet in the pod's emergency airlock. He shared his breathing mix with the dying creature, creating a small bubble of atmosphere around its massive head. The action nearly killed him, leaving him gasping and dizzy, but it allowed the Shadow Maw to sense the gases that humans breathed. In that moment, something incredible happened. The creature began to emit a specific frequency pattern, a low thrumming sound that Danny could feel in his bones even through his environmental suit. It was communication, the first recorded instance of a Shadow Maw attempting to communicate with another species. Danny, Dr. Singh's voice came through his communication system from the colony. We are monitoring your bioelectric readings. What you are doing is impossible. The creature should have killed you by now. Danny reached out with one gloved hand and gently touched the Shadow Maw's snout. The creature's eyes closed and its thrumming grew louder. On his scanner, Danny could see the other Shadow Maws in the area responding to the frequency. They were moving away from the colony, no longer circling like predators but retreating like a pack that had received new orders. I understand now, Danny whispered. You are not monsters. You are parents. You are family. The injured Shadow Maw gave one final powerful thrum, then went still. Danny floated beside its massive form for several minutes, grieving for a creature he had barely understood just hours before. Around him, the asteroid field had become quiet. The other Shadow Maws had vanished into the deep void, taking their presence away from the colony that had threatened their family members' eggs. When Danny finally returned to his pod and headed back to the Nexus Dawn, he carried with him the knowledge that everything the galaxy believed about Shadow Maws was wrong. They were not mindless killers. They were intelligent, social creatures with complex family structures and protective instincts. And somehow, impossibly, one of them had chosen to trust a tiny human with the safety of its children. Danny floated in the pod bay of the Nexus Dawn, still shaking from his encounter with the Shadow Maw. His environmental suit was damp with sweat, and his hands trembled as he completed the post-flight checklist. Through the bay windows he could see the asteroid field where the eggs waited, hidden and vulnerable. Rodriguez, report to the bridge immediately. Captain Zethkar's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. Danny made his way through the corridors, aware that every crew member he passed was staring at him. Word had spread quickly about what had happened in the asteroid field. Some looked at him with curiosity, others with fear, and a few with something that might have been respect. The bridge was crowded when Danny arrived. All the senior officers were present, along with several crew members who normally would not have access to command meetings. Captain Zethkar stood at the center of the room, his red scales gleaming under the harsh lights. Explain, the captain said simply. Danny took a deep breath. The Shadow Maw was not hunting, sir. It was protecting its eggs from the mining drones. The colony's automated systems must have damaged the nest, and the parent was trying to defend its young. That is impossible, Crix growled. Shadow Maws are predators. They do not have complex social behaviors. I saw the eggs, sir, and I felt the creature's communication. It was trying to tell me something about protecting its family. Voxtal's crystalline form chimed softly. The human claims the creature communicated with him. This contradicts everything we know about Shadow Maw intelligence. What I know, Danny said, his voice growing stronger, is that the parent Shadow Maw trusted me enough to show me its eggs. And when it died, the other Shadow Maws left the area. They are not attacking the colony anymore. Captain Zethkar was quiet for a long moment. Dr. Singh reports that all Shadow Maw activity around New Titan has ceased. The evacuation is proceeding normally, but this does not explain what happened between you and the creature. Over the next few weeks, as the Nexus Dawn continued its research mission, strange things began to happen. Danny found himself drawn to the observation deck more often, staring out at the stars with an inexplicable feeling that something was watching them. His sleep was filled with dreams of deep space and bioluminescent patterns that seemed to carry meaning. On the 5th day after leaving New Titan, Wisp detected an unusual sensor contact following the ship at extreme range. It was organic, massive, and moving with purpose. It is a Shadow Maw, Wisp reported to the bridge. Juvenile, approximately 60 meters in length. It has been matching our course and speed for the past 3 hours. Impossible, Crix said. Shadow Maws do not follow ships. They hunt or they ignore. They do not stalk prey for hours, but Danny knew better. He had been feeling the creature's presence for days, a subtle awareness that grew stronger each time he looked out at the stars. It is not stalking us, he said. It is following me. Captain Zethkar summoned the senior staff to an emergency meeting. Danny was included, much to Crix's obvious displeasure. On the main screen, they could see the Shadow Maw keeping pace with their ship, its bioluminescent patches creating a gentle light show in the darkness. This behavior is unprecedented, Naira observed, her tentacles curling with nervous energy. Shadow Maws have never shown interest in following specific individuals. Danny stared at the screen, and somehow he knew that the creature staring back was connected to the eggs he had seen in the asteroid field. I think it is one of the offspring. The parent Shadow Maw's communication may have created some kind of bond. Bonds between species do not exist, Voxtel stated flatly. It is a scientific impossibility. Then explain why it is following us, Danny challenged. Before anyone could respond, the ship's communication system activated. Professor Elena Vasquez appeared on the screen, her transmission coming from the Human Research Station at Alpha Centauri. She was an older woman with graying hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Captain Zethkar, I have been monitoring your mission reports. I need to speak with Specialist Rodriguez immediately. Danny stepped forward, surprised to be addressed by his title rather than as the human. Professor Vasquez. This is Danny Rodriguez. Danny, what you have described in your encounter with the Shadow Maw is extraordinary. I have been studying xenobiological interactions for 30 years, and I believe you may have experienced something that we thought was impossible. What do you mean? Captain Zethkar interrupted. Humans evolved alongside many different species on Earth. Our ability to form emotional bonds with other animals is well documented, but we always assumed this ability was limited to Earth species. What Danny has described suggests that our bonding capacity may extend to alien life forms as well. Danny felt his heart racing. You mean the connection I felt was real? More than real. I believe you have formed what we call an interspecies familial bond. The Shadow Maw parent may have recognized something in you that triggered its protective instincts. When it died, that bond may have transferred to its offspring. Crix made a sound of disgust. This is ridiculous. Humans cannot bond with apex predators, can they not? Professor Vasquez asked. On Earth, humans have bonded with wolves, bears, and even great white sharks. Why should space-dwelling creatures be any different? Over the following days, the evidence became undeniable. The young Shadow Maw continued to follow the ship, always maintaining a respectful distance but never leaving their vicinity. When pirates attacked the Nexus Dawn near the Kepler system, the Shadow Maw drove them off with displays of bioelectric power that left the pirates' ships disabled and drifting. It protected us, Danny said after reviewing the battle recordings. It could have stayed hidden, but it chose to fight for us. Even Crix had to admit that the creature's intervention had saved their lives. I still do not understand it, the Caltharian warrior grumbled, but I cannot argue with the results. The crew's attitude toward Danny began to change. No longer was he just the small human who fixed things in tight spaces. He had become something unprecedented, a bridge between two species that had been enemies for generations. But their newfound peace was interrupted when a Galactic Defense Forces cruiser intercepted them near the Vega system. Commander Pike appeared on their main screen, his gray uniform crisp and his expression stern. Captain Zethkar, you are harboring a dangerous alien predator. We have orders to eliminate the Shadow Maw threat immediately. Commander Pike, Zethkar replied carefully. The creature has shown no hostile intent. In fact, it has actively protected this ship. That makes it even more dangerous. High Command believes that any alliance between humans and Shadow Maws represents a potential weapon that could destabilize galactic security. We cannot allow such a precedent to be set. Danny stepped forward. Commander, you do not understand. The Shadow Maw is not a weapon. It is a family member. It is protecting us because it considers us part of its pack. Pike's expression hardened. That is exactly what we are afraid of, Specialist. A human who can control Shadow Maws could pose a threat to every civilization in the galaxy. I do not control it, Danny protested. I am part of its family structure. There is a difference, not to High Command. Prepare to transfer the human to our custody. The Shadow Maw will be eliminated once he is no longer present to protect it. Captain Zethkar's scales darkened with anger. I will not surrender a member of my crew without just cause. The cause is galactic security, Pike replied. You have 1 hour to comply or we will take the human by force. As the transmission ended, Danny felt a familiar thrumming sensation in his mind. Somewhere outside the ship, his Shadow Maw companion was sensing his distress. The creature he had come to think of as Shadow was preparing to defend him, just as its parent had defended its eggs. Captain, Danny said quietly, we need to talk, because I think Shadow is about to call for help, and when a young Shadow Maw calls for help, something much bigger usually answers. Through the bridge windows, they could see Shadow's bioluminescent patterns growing brighter and more complex. The creature was sending a message into the deep void, and somewhere in the darkness between the stars, something ancient and powerful was listening. The real test of Danny's bond with the Shadow Maws was about to begin. Danny stood on the bridge of the Nexus Dawn, watching as Shadow's bioluminescent patterns grew more intense. The young Shadow Maw was calling into the deep void with frequencies that made the ship's hull vibrate. Whatever message it was sending, it was urgent and powerful. Sir, Wisp reported, electromagnetic voice crackling with concern. I am detecting massive bioelectric signatures approaching from multiple vectors. Whatever that creature is calling, it is being answered. Commander Pike's voice came through the communication system, filled with barely controlled anger. Captain Zethkar, order your human to control that creature immediately or we will open fire. I cannot control Shadow, Danny said, stepping closer to the communication console. It senses that I am in danger, and it is calling for help the only way it knows how. Through the bridge windows, they could see the Defense Forces cruiser positioning itself for an attack run. Its weapons were already charging, casting an ominous red glow across its hull. But before Pike could give the order to fire, space itself seemed to explode around them. The largest shadow maw Danny had ever seen emerged from the darkness between stars. It was ancient and massive, easily 300 meters long, with bioluminescent patterns that covered its entire body like a constellation. Its presence was so overwhelming that both ships' sensors screamed warnings about bioelectric interference. By the void, Captain Zethkar whispered. That creature is larger than my ship. The ancient shadow maw moved with fluid grace toward the Defense Forces cruiser, but it did not attack. Instead, it positioned itself between the military ship and the Nexus Dawn, creating a living barrier that made it impossible for Pike to target either Shadow or Danny's ship. All ships, stand down immediately. Pike's voice was tight with fear. We have multiple hostile contacts. Repeat, stand down and prepare for emergency jump to hyperspace. But Danny could feel something in his mind, a presence that was vast and patient and incredibly old. The ancient shadow maw was not hostile. It was curious. It wanted to understand what had happened to create a bond between its offspring and a small human. Captain, Danny said, I need to make direct contact with the elder shadow maw. It is the only way to prevent a battle. Absolutely not, Crix growled. That creature could destroy this entire ship with a single bioelectric pulse. It could have already done that if it wanted to, Danny pointed out. But it has not attacked anyone. It is here because Shadow called for help, and it wants to understand why. Danny could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him as he made his decision. I am going out there. Shadow trusts me, and I think the Elder will too. Danny, no. Naira's tentacles curled with distress. Even if the creature does not mean to hurt you, the bioelectric field around something that large could kill you instantly. Maybe, Danny admitted. But if I do nothing, Pike will attack and people will die. I would rather take the risk myself than let others suffer for my choices. Captain Zethkar was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. If you are determined to do this, then we will support you. But you will take a full environmental suit and maintain constant communication with the ship. Danny suited up quickly, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to attempt. As he prepared to leave the ship, he could hear the crew discussing his chances over the communication system. Even Crix seemed genuinely concerned for his safety. Rodriguez, the Caltharian warrior said as Danny reached the airlock. For what it is worth, you have earned my respect. You may be small, but you have the heart of a warrior. Danny smiled inside his helmet. Thank you, Crix. That means more to me than you know. He launched from the ship in a small EVA unit, propelling himself toward the massive form of the Elder Shadow Maw. Up close, the creature was even more impressive. Its skin was covered with scars that spoke of battles fought across centuries, and its eyes held an intelligence that was alien, but undeniably aware. Shadow moved to intercept him, positioning itself between Danny and the Elder. For a moment, Danny thought the young Shadow Maw was trying to protect him. Then he realized that Shadow was actually introducing him, using its bioluminescent patterns to communicate Danny's identity and the nature of their bond. The Elder, Shadow Maw's response was a complex symphony of light and bioelectric pulses that Danny could feel in his bones. It was like listening to an ancient language that he almost but not quite understood. Gradually, he began to sense meaning in the patterns. The Elder was old, older than human civilization. It had watched species rise and fall across the galaxy, had seen wars fought and peace negotiated between creatures that should have been natural enemies. It had learned that intelligence took many forms, and that cooperation was often more powerful than conflict. Danny removed his helmet, creating a small bubble of atmosphere around his head, just as he had done with Shadow's parent weeks before. The action triggered every safety alarm on his suit, but it also allowed the Elder Shadow Maw to sense the gases he breathed and the electromagnetic patterns of his brain. In that moment of contact, Danny felt the full weight of the Elder's consciousness touch his mind, It was like standing before an ocean of knowledge and experience that stretched back millions of years. But within that vastness, he also felt something familiar, the same protective instinct that he had sensed from Shadow's parent. The elder Shadow Maw was not just ancient and powerful. It was the matriarch of its species, the keeper of their collective memory and the guardian of their family structures. When Shadow had called for help, it had not just been asking for protection. It had been announcing the formation of a new kind of family, one that included a member of an alien species. Through their connection, Danny began to understand the truth about Shadow Maws. They were not predators in the way that other species understood the term. They were guardians, ancient beings that had appointed themselves as protectors of the trade routes and deep space passages that connected the galaxy's civilizations. For millions of years, they had hunted the things that hunted others, creatures from the dark spaces between stars that fed on the electromagnetic signatures of technology and life. The Shadow Maws had kept these horrors at bay, allowing younger species to develop and spread across the galaxy without ever knowing what threatened them from the void. But their protective nature had been misunderstood. When ships encountered Shadow Maws, they saw only large, powerful creatures and assumed they were being hunted. The resulting conflicts had driven the Shadow Maws to the edges of known space, where they continued their ancient duty in isolation and silence. "You want to show them?" Danny said aloud, his words carrying through the small atmosphere bubble to the Elder's consciousness. "You want the galaxy to understand what you really are." The Elder's response was a pulse of agreement so powerful that it reached both ships. On the Defense Forces cruiser, Commander Pike was frantically trying to understand what was happening as his sensors registered unprecedented levels of organized bioelectric activity. "This is impossible." Pike's voice came through Danny's communication system. "The creature is not attacking. It is communicating?" "Commander," Danny said, floating between Shadow and the Elder Shadow Maw like a tiny bridge between two worlds. "I would like you to meet the real Shadow Maws. They are not the monsters you think they are. They are the guardians that have been protecting all of us for longer than our species have existed." Through his connection with the Elder, Danny began to relay information that had been hidden for millions of years. The Shadow Maws' true history, their role as protectors, their complex family structures, and their willingness to accept new members into their ancient community. As the story unfolded, both ships' crews listened in amazement. Even Pike seemed to understand that everything the galaxy believed about Shadow Maws was wrong. These creatures were not threats to be eliminated, but allies that had been waiting for someone to understand their true nature. "Commander," Captain Zethkar said finally, "I believe we need to contact Galactic Command immediately. This information changes everything we know about one of the galaxy's oldest species." Pike was quiet for several minutes. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its hostile edge. "Rodriguez, can you ask the Shadow Maws if they would be willing to establish formal diplomatic contact with the Galactic Council?" Danny felt the Elder's amusement ripple through their connection. The ancient creature had been waiting for this question for a very long time. Its response was clear and unmistakable. The Shadow Maws had always been ready for peace. They had simply been waiting for someone small enough and brave enough to serve as a bridge between their species and the rest of the galaxy. Months later, Danny stood in the council chambers on Galactic Station 1, wearing the uniform of a senior xenobiologist and carrying the credentials of the first official human Shadow Maw liaison. Behind him, Shadow waited in a specially constructed pool that allowed it to accompany Danny to important meetings. The crew of the Nexus Dawn had all received commendations for their role in establishing first contact with the Shadow Maws. Captain Zethkar had been promoted to Admiral, and even Crix had grudgingly admitted that sometimes the smallest crew member could make the biggest difference. Specialist Rodriguez, the council chairman, said, "Your report on